Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Iron Culture, presented by the Mass Research Review. It's Monday night. It's 7 p.m. We're doing a live episode. I am here with the one and only Dr. Helms. Helms, how you doing today?
I'm actually doing great, Trex, because we got some really cool feedback that caught me off guard. I had to text you, actually engaging with you outside of the confines of the podcast.
Which I normally,
generally,
there's kind of
yeah,
a rule. Yeah.
you're against. It doesn't go well, but I thought even you would appreciate this, even if it came from me. And I wasn't saying I was surprised, but I was pleased to see that we could at least have that level of cordialness between us. But it's pretty cool. I'm looking forward to sharing it with all the listeners.
Yeah, I mean, do you want to go for it? Do you want to take it away?
Yeah.
Let's
Yeah.
do
Okay.
it.
So for a little context, we both have university jobs in addition to our science communication work. So, I do come into AUT, specifically up at AUT Millennium, where we have the Sprins labs regularly, and to meet with my students. Help with research projects, go to meetings, do stuff like that. And we have an internal mail system. So our research coordinator, the awesome Jane, she was like, "Hey, Eric, did you see you got a package?" I was like, "Oh, no, I did not." And I'm anticipating this is something like something internal related to research or from a student or from the graduate research
Plastic
school.
cryo tubes coming in, that kind of deal.
Not nearly as cool as the stuff you do, but something, right?
Right.
No, it was actually from one of the other faculties. So just for kind of cross language for people in like the U.S., we have the university, then we have faculties, then we have schools underneath those, and departments underneath those. So I sit within the Faculty of Health and Environmental Sciences in the School of Sport and Recreation, and this was sent from someone in art and design. So I was like, "What is this? This is not at all what I expected." And they sent me two things. One, a piece of paper with a published abstract on one side, which is amazing from PubMed, and then a personal note on the other side. And I'm going to read you the personal note. Kia ora, Dr. Helms, which is a traditional Maori greeting. I was aghast and ashamed to hear Dr. Trexler and yourself shilling for and spreading misinformation in aid of big plastic, capital letters, on the recent episode 329 of Iron Culture. I thought I'd reach out to show you the light. On the reverse of this note, you'll find a study correcting your joint blind spot. I hope the enclosed gift finds you well and sways you to the cause. I would leave it till July 12th before using the board to allow the natural and food-safe chopping board oil to cure. This will hopefully give you time to sway your wife as well. You won't need to wash this with soap or hot water after use. Just give it a wipe with a damp cloth and will be free of bacteria imminently. Spray and wipe if you must. If all this does still not sway you and yours, enjoy the large chunk of American black cherry, use unknown. Thank you for all the great content. Your local big wood and metal representative, capital levels, Angus Roberts. Shout out to you. Amazing. This made my day. A senior technician at Art and Design in the School of AUT. So one of my colleagues in another faculty is an Iron Culture listener. And check out this beautiful piece of American black cherry that I am now, once I get back from Europe in about a week and a half, I will be able to actually use and cut. And he brought receipts. Other side, I'm going to read the abstract. And just like any good science communicator, I will absolutely not read the full text. This abstract I'm going to take to the bank and over and misinterpret because that's apparently what we do these days as science communicators. Okay, so this is published in the Journal of Food Protection, I believe, PROT. I'm not sure actually what the, it's got to be what it is, but, these abbreviations are tough to discern sometimes. And this is by, it almost looks not legit, Ness O Ak, because the middle name of O and AK, it looks like Ness Oak, and this is something on wood. I am not lying. Y'all can see that on the live chat. But anyway, it is Ak, Cliver, and Caspar, published in 1994. So this has been known. Cutting boards of plastic and wood contaminated experimentally with bacteria. The microbiology of plastic and wooden cutting boards were studied regarding cross-contamination of foods in home kitchens. New and used plastic, 4 polymers plus hard rubber, and wood, 9 different hardwoods. Cutting boards were cut into 5 centimeter squares. I'm not going to read the whole abstract
Thank
because we'd
God.
lose all our followers. But what they did was they contaminated them with various strains of bacteria, including like salmonella and some like legit stuff that you would not want. And they did this with nutrient broth or chicken juice, and they recovered it by soaking the surface in nutrient broth or pressing the block onto nutrient agar. And then they let some time pass, and they made sure that the bacteria was inoculated onto the plastic blocks. And then they looked at it over time, and they found that, guess what? These results do not support the often heard assertion that the plastic cutting boards are more sanitary than wood. So there was no difference between the two, and clean wood blocks were able to, like within 3 to 10 minutes, show that they had no sign of bacteria afterwards. So great sign. Yeah. So good news for everyone out there. If you want to use you know, wood cutting boards, you just have to, rinse them and use a damp cloth, and they should have 98% at a minimum. That was the lowest finding, up to 99.9% bacteria-free surfaces. So long as you, just take care of them. So,
Wow.
Great news. Huge thank you to Angus Roberts. Thank you for listening. Thank you for the feedback. Thank you for making me a cutting board by hand. I'm incredibly honored. And don't we have the best listeners on the planet, Trex?
I'll take your word for it. Nobody's sending me anything, so.
Hey, you don't know what you're going to get within internal mail at Duke. This might change
true.
stuff.
Yeah, we will see. No, it's what's really interesting is, so we went into that episode, Helms, and layered it with what felt like a gratuitous number of caveats and prefaces of saying, like, we are addressing this because people ask about it a lot, and it's an area of heated debate and novel research. So, like, normally we like to give you the impression that what we say on this show you can take to the bank. We basically said, do not take this to the bank. This is not, you will not be able to store this in a bank. You cannot exchange it for any goods or services or currencies at a bank. This is not bankable, but we've been asked to address it, and we will take a shot at it. And so it felt like a gratuitous number of caveats, but after getting feedback, I actually think it's an appropriate number of caveats because I have some things I want to clarify as well. One thing I want to note, though, something that's very interesting, Helms, is throughout the whole episode, we really talked about how so much of this stuff is novel. It's unsettled. It's, like, there's not going to be, frankly, a protein paper that comes out next month where we say, oh my God, this changes everything. Like, we're really in that area with the protein literature. We're kind of circling those last few little sub questions and hammering those out, right? When it comes to microplastics, it's still in that early area where it's like every 3 months a paper comes out and you say, oh, so then throw out everything and let's start fresh. Or, that's an exaggeration, but literal paradigm shifts every several papers, which is not a normal thing in an established area of research. This research area is just not established yet. But what's really interesting is that the research here is so careful and measured and cautious. And frankly, I would say, what's the word I'm thinking of? I guess that's enough adjectives. Almost a little bit speculative, to be completely honest, where it's like, you know what, we use the best method we know of to measure what we think is important, and here's what we think what we think it kind of tells us in terms of actionable information. But opinions on it out in the world can tend to be very strong, especially like this isn't about microplastics per se, but while you got that feedback, Helms, that came with an actual abstract and a block of wood saying, like, there's been research saying that, like, this is not any less sanitary. It does just fine, nothing to worry about there. We also got a comment, I think that went straight to, like, the Spotify feed. We got a comment there where a person was actually, like, not just like, hey, I think you guys missed this. They actually seemed, like, disappointed in us on, like, a moral level. Like almost like a knowing you could be so wrong and have this type of shortcoming as a human being makes me not only not want to listen to you in the future, but regret the time I invested in listening to you. And their whole point was that if you use wooden utensils, because they soak up bacteria like a sponge, you it's not enough to clean them. You have to literally shave them down on a regular basis and essentially become like a part-time woodworker in order to get them to a sanitary level. So we got literally dueling pieces of feedback that could not have been more polar opposites. But yours came with a gift and mine just came with a like, screw you, you're an idiot. So that's one point.
Well, hopefully we didn't lose that person to the point where they did not see this episode, because they might have just learned, oh, maybe I don't need to be a woodworker who is shaving down my wood utensils based upon the data.
Yeah, maybe so. Now, Helms, here's one where this was not the part of the episode where we were going by the studies, where we were saying, here's a study finding. I don't think this, assessment method or detection method is valid. Therefore, we shouldn't worry about this part. This is when we started ad-libbing a little bit, doing a little bit of speculation, a little bit of practical application where the research really isn't quite there yet. And so, we both were responsible for this, but we're talking a little bit about like covering what we just covered on microplastics. Are you going to plan to change anything? And in some of those potential changes, we had mentioned a couple things that very recent research came out that actually may suggest we were wasting our time with some of those potential changes. And so this is really surprising stuff. So paper came out. There's actually, I saw the new one and then kind of followed back to a couple older ones. Of course, there's nothing old in this area at all. But there have been at least a couple of studies now where they compare, hey, we want to look at sodas, for example. And so we are going to, Helms, if I were going to go get a soda, I basically in America have three options. I could get soda that's stored in a glass bottle, which is pretty atypical, but it exists. I could get soda stored in a plastic bottle, very common. Or I can get soda stored in a beautiful aluminum can. You're going Pepsi, I'm going Coke. We'll see which sponsor rushes in.
Look at that.
Yeah. So you got glass, you got plastic, you got aluminum. Now, Helms, which one of those far and away, obviously and clearly, has the most microplastic exposure when they actually measure the liquid?
I'm going to go out on a limb and say the plastic one.
Me too. And that was the premise of a lot of our speculative, like, well, maybe I'll use more non-plastic bottles and, maybe I'll do glass or aluminum. Like, we got problems, Helms. So I was stunned, and many have been stunned to learn that when they actually measure these liquids, it's not just that there isn't a huge gap between plastic and the others. For some beverages, they're finding that you have more microplastics from glass bottles than you have from plastic bottles. And the same is true for aluminum cans sometimes. So,
amazing.
Essentially,
can I say something real quick?
Of course.
Because I had a fun conversation with my wife about changing our environment, because what do we want to do, how do we get rid of do we have some more silicone utensils, because she's on top of this, and she is actually more environmentally aware and has read a little bit more than I have, and she's also in a semi-related field, like she reads material science sometimes as a geologist, but when I started going off on this and talking about maybe we shouldn't be using our plastic shaker cups and stuff like that, she was like, Eric, I understand that is plastic, but just because you touch plastic doesn't mean that it's going to become degraded. We're not heating these up. We're typically not like letting our plastic spatula touch the frying pan until it deforms before we flip something. And putting cold water and protein powder, doing this and drinking it 5 seconds later.
We don't need
I don't think it's going to be
those gestures on the show. We're good.
Oh, apologies. You don't need to work. She says I would be skeptical that that's actually resulting in contamination. I'm like, I don't know, better safe than sorry. And then this is even, so she'll be happy to hear this because she'll be right.
Yeah. So it turns out that aluminum cans on the inside are typically lined with all sorts of plastics. So you're like, oh, aluminum, what could go wrong? But
Amazing.
the companies are like, well, we don't actually want the beverage if it's made to withstand long-term storage. We don't actually want it just interacting with pure like aluminum or whatever they make the can out of, some aluminum-based metal. And so yeah, they line it with a type of plastic that does seem to leach into the beverage. When it comes to glass bottles, what's tricky is that apparently it's the scratches on the cap can cause some plastic leaching. And so then, if there's a scratch inside the cap and the bottle is inverted at some period of time during storage or shipping, then you're getting some of that leaching. So all of that is to say, I still don't think the take-home message is panic, but I do think I'm increasingly convinced that the take-home message is you are more powerless than you ever imagined. You have no say, no bearing over your own body, what you are exposed to, your personal health and well-being. This is all completely out of your hands. They were also talking about how, like, when you're going to these like bottle by bottle things, sometimes it's just like, who had more dust sitting around in the manufacturing plant, and that goes not just for beverages, but obviously for foods. It's like it is such an insidious thing that can get in so many places, and it's so many steps in the manufacturing and storage process. I have revised my position, not in all the science stuff we talked about. As far as I can tell, that stuff all holds pretty well. It was just when we started to kind of like, do a little bit of elaboration at the end and a little speculation about maybe I'll do this, maybe I'll do that. I'm pretty much walking away from that and just saying, like, this is the type of thing that I'm increasingly convinced has to be taken care of. If it is found to be a problem, this is going to have to be a systems level, like, hey, we don't manufacture these linings anymore. Bottle caps no longer include this. Manufacturing processes are going to be updated in the following ways at the factory level. Like, this is going to be something that is only really actionable at the level of regulation, I think. So, of course, you still want to go out and avoid like egregious, if you pick up your, your bottle and you're like, hey, is there little bits of plastic floating in there? You probably don't want to do that.
Wooden cutting boards still make sense.
It does. Yes.
You know what? Because actually, literally carving into plastic into your food, probably a bad idea. And these can be bacteria free. So there are body autonomy is not a complete lie.
True.
Trex.
And that's a hard sell in the fitness world. that's like the defining principles. We are going to take power over our health and do what we want. So no, but the actual kind of take home to kind of sort through this is the science portion. When we talk through the studies about microplastics in the body and where they come from and things like that, that stuff was all good. We erred a bit in kind of buying the hype about the purported uncleanliness or unhygienic nature of wooden utensils and cutting boards, things of that nature. And we also erred a bit in our assumption, which seemed very intuitive, that maybe if plastic bottles do a lot of leaching, maybe I'll do glass. Apparently not so much. Maybe I'll do aluminum. Actually, not so much. So those are the only things where we essentially missed the mark a little bit in terms of I missed the mark in terms of how much you can really control and kind of micromanage deliberately your exposure, especially when it comes to things like bottled or beverage containers, food containers, things of that nature. These microplastics, they can be out there. All right, Helms, is there anything else that you want to say about microplastics before we move on?
No, I just have now. I'm actually wondering as to how well recycling even goes with aluminum cans. I have more questions now that I know these things.
I've been reassured that they're still very much fully recyclable with that plastic liner included. I don't know how. I've been when I was a kid, Helms. I almost said when we were kids. When I was a kid, you were in your 30s, but when I was a kid, recycling was the big thing. Like when you were in school, no one was like, hey, global warming. What they taught kids about was protect the ozone layer and recycle.
Recycle, reduce, reuse, baby.
Exactly. And the ozone layer too. It was all about like, don't use aerosols, careful with the styrofoam and the CFCs. Young people have probably never heard any of this stuff because, again, at the regulation level, they pretty much nip that in the bud, is the impression I've gotten. But anyway, I lost my train of thought. What was I talking about?
You were asking if I had any other thoughts on it, and I said, "Oh, is this stuff even recyclable?" And you've assured me that it is, and I shouldn't, but I am taking your word for it.
Yeah, but anyway, I forget where I was going with that whole train of thought. But yeah, you can still recycle the aluminum cans, as far as I know. But yeah, unfortunately, they're not the savior that I was hoping they'd be. One thing I did want to mention on this topic, Helms, is so with this is a good example of something that comes up all the time, Helms, which is you say, I've heard this quote from you. I don't know if you want to attribute it to somebody else, but not everything that's true makes sense, and not everything that makes sense is true, and vice versa, right? You can flip that whichever way you like. This is a really good example of how if you just go pure intuition, you will make extremely logical assumptions and extremely logical conclusions that may not pan out. And that is why, in a world where everyone's like, who cares about all this science nonsense, all this mumbo jumbo? Why do you need to dive into all the particulars and the granular stuff? And you find a research study that, of course, an obvious finding that I already assumed to be true. What a waste of time, right? If I were to wave around a study that said, hey, did you know glass bottles have less microplastics than plastic bottles? People would say, who is wasting our tax dollars funding this crap, right? Well, the reason we waste our tax, quote unquote, waste it funding this crap is because sometimes it doesn't actually pan out. And so in this case, I would have bet the farm on those studies that the glass bottles would have been a massive and very meaningful reduction in microplastic exposure. And Helms, it just didn't happen. It didn't turn out.
It didn't. And you said this last episode that to some degree, being more reliant on empirical research rather than mechanisms or logic is a sign of experience, because we run into this time and time again to the point where we just smirk and smile. And while it sounds very illogical to say, sometimes things that are true don't make sense, and sometimes things that make sense aren't true, it's not a statement that is accurate when all things are known. But the reality is that all things are not known, and we don't know what we don't know.
Yep.
The funny thing about blind spots is you can't see them. And that is their nature. And I think once you've been down this path multiple times, and why I really caution people against going out on too much of a mechanistic limb or a speculative limb or building house of cards out of logic, is that every step of that house of cards, every level you go up, you're having a multiplicative possibility of missing out on something you don't know, and the interaction effects and the second and third and fourth order effects, to where you get to a point where I can almost guarantee you're wrong, even though I can follow your logic train back to the start. And this is just one of those examples. Of course, plastic has more plastic in it than aluminum. And if that was the only pertinent fact, the only thing to know, then that would be a true statement. But we didn't know that aluminum is lined with plastic. So, and there's equivalence of that, whether we're talking about eccentrics for hypertrophy, the interaction between caffeine and creatine, or endless things that are more innocuous and more mild that apply to bodybuilding and fitness and fat loss and health, or things that are potentially more widespread that do require study, like something like the emerging area of microplastics. So I think it's well said. I don't think the quote should be attributed to me, because it's just so far-reaching, even though I have repeated it many times, and it is something that is self-evident if you're aware of the history of even just a decade of almost any field.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, this is one of those examples where, man, it is so obvious and intuitive, and yet it's not true. Some of those things that we were like, well, I guess if I want to limit my microplastic exposure, maybe I'll do this, right? So that's why you dig into the studies, you check, and then you come back in front of tens of millions of people on the show and say, never mind. I guess that won't work.
Yep.
So yeah, Helms, I think that that wraps up our little clarification section here. We have a big announcement, celebratory announcement. I completely lost my train of thought after I made a joke about your age, and I'm still just baffled at where I might have been going with that. Maybe it'll hit me in the middle of the night, but I want to go ahead and risk another age dig here, because I am pleased to announce, on behalf of the Mass crew, we now officially have one issue for every year of Helms's life. As of today, has it gone live? I think it's gone live already. Yeah,
It has.
we just released the 100th issue of the Mass Research Review. That is 100 issues of the hardest hitting science related to training, nutrition, and all adjacent topics, psychology, behavior, you name it. If it's related to getting jacked, getting healthy, or helping others do the same, getting very, very strong, that is covered in Mass. We've been doing it as a team since 2017, every single month. 100 issues, never a late issue. Now, I jumped on the bandwagon after it was already rolling down the road. I was not around for the first about 2 years. So Helms, as a person who has been in all 100 of those 100 issues, you and Mike are the only people who can say that. How does it feel to cross this big milestone?
You know, in all seriousness, it is mind-boggling. And that's not just because of early or facetiously late onset Alzheimer's, if I am actually to be believed to be 100 years old, which, by the way, I got to sell my skincare routine if that's the case.
100 in fitness years.
100, and I'll give you that.
Yeah.
That's 100. That's 100% true. Because at this point, I should have pivoted and gotten canceled at least 3 times.
Yes.
You know, changed my name.
If you still exist
out there.
in the fitness world after the age of 27, you probably didn't do very well.
So I'm a great example
You're supposed
of someone who is.
You're supposed to fly way too close to the sun and have this incredible arc where you blow up and then collapse all by the age of 27. So you took a different trajectory, and we appreciate you for it.
Yeah, no, I have been watching Icarus's fly by my biplane that has been slowly climbing and crash down in the time that I am still slowly climbing almost on a daily basis. That is for sure. So how does it feel? It feels amazing because each issue is a tremendous amount of work. I think that's just something we have to acknowledge. And when you guys, like our PDF is over 100 pages, and that's normal. So we're essentially producing a joint master's thesis on a monthly basis, and we've been doing that for 8 years, and that's nuts. So it's pretty cool. And on a very, very selfish note, Trex, it's made me so much better at my job, and I'm so glad that we went out and we decided to do this, because it is a commitment. You're locked into doing something every month, and to keep it fresh, because like you said, certain things, creatine, protein, hasn't changed much. We do have to expand outside of our little comfort zone. You know, if you go back and look at the 2017 issue, unsurprisingly, Mike and I were writing about autoregulation, you know, and that's what I did my PhD on. In the next issue, I think I wrote about protein, or very early on in it. That's what I did my second master's on. But, you know, now I'm doing stuff on long muscle length training, on science, you know, philosophy, and everything in between. Obviously, I'm still in my broader wheelhouse, but I will happily say that my wheelhouse has expanded, and it has made me a better thinker, and it has made me far more critical, and hopefully a better communicator. And also it gives me a real sense of confidence that there are literally thousands of people who have stayed subscribers since the start, and they themselves are in many cases content creators, educators, or trainers. And that gives me a really profound sense of hope, because I know that their fingers are reaching even broader than ours. So it's been a great run, and I want to thank everyone who's either a new, old, prior, current subscribers, whatever, or just, you know, partakes in our free content, because I know not everyone's in a financial position to truly, you know, be a subscriber. And I have to say, I'm so glad you came on board as well, because your Renaissance man-like career trajectory has really benefited, I think, not just Mass team, but also all the subscribers.
Yeah, it's funny because like if I think all the way back to like 2018-ish, 19-ish when I came on board, one would be forgiven for thinking like, well, that's a bit redundant, right? Like they already have a bodybuilding Eric, and I dabbled in powerlifting as well, but we already had powerlifting covered. But it is interesting, like you never know where this wacky science stuff and fitness stuff is going to take you. And yeah, I mean, if you look at my articles lately, I rarely write about supplements, even though that used to be kind of a big hobby horse. I still do from time to time when there's something interesting that comes out. But yeah, it's been really fun to watch my own topics really kind of, not by force, it's not like a conscious decision of like, you know, you see like on TV shows and movies when journalists are like on deadline in a newspaper room and they're like, there's 8 pots of coffee on. They're like, we got to get something out by midnight. It's like there is so much to be learned about health and fitness and wellness. I mean, you could turn over new rocks for the rest of your life and still have more to turn over. So it's been really fun to watch Mass, really nail the key stuff in its niche and then kind of snowball from there. It's not like an untethered runaway train that's kind of careening off its course, but it's snowballing and it's expanding into these adjacent topics that I think ultimately serve to, continue. Even if you were kind of in that core, I want to get big, strong, and jacked, these other topics at some point in your fitness journey will be instrumental to facilitating those aims. So yeah, it's been cool to watch Mass change over the years without abandoning its kind of core niche and purpose, which has been awesome. So like you said, I want to thank everyone who's been around since day one, or at least since the day I joined. If you didn't, there's a lot of folks, I don't want to name anyone, but there's a lot of people who consider the official canon of Mass to be the ones that started when I came on full time. There's a lot of debate over, there was one guest article I did before I officially joined the crew. Scholars will debate whether or not that's part of the canon for years and probably centuries to come. A lot of folks, the majority opinion is that the stuff before me, while still good, it's kind of like the Apocrypha in biblical terms. It's the other books that are still worth a read. They're page turners. Keep them on hand, but they may not quite fit the true canon. So I'll leave that to the Mass subscribers, but that's the feedback I typically get. But once again, huge thanks to everyone who's been a part of that, and huge thanks to people who may in the future be part of that. If you're interested in catching up very briefly on those 100 issues, but more importantly, joining in, because this thing keeps on chugging. We're always covering the new stuff, always contextualizing it based on what's known previously. If you subscribe to Mass and you just jump into issue 100, you're not going to feel behind whatsoever. But if you're interested in getting on that train and taking things to the next level in terms of your own education, your ability to support your own training goals of people around you, make sure you check out massresearchreview.com as we are celebrating all month that 100th issue. Anything else to add on that, Helms?
Not on that, but I do have maybe a slightly somber announcement and then a final announcement before we jump into the Q&A.
Yeah. Go for it.
Okay, so this 19 hours ago, Ronnie Coleman, 8-time Mr. Olympia, perhaps one of the greatest bodybuilders of at least my era, which, as we noted, spans back to the beginning of bodybuilding in apparently 1925. Hey guys, I hate to break it to y'all, but I won't be able to make it to the UK this week like I planned. Unfortunately, I had a medical emergency and had to stick around here in the US for treatment. But don't worry, I'm in great hands, getting the best care, and I'm staying strong through it all. I'll be back and better than ever, and I can't wait to get out there and see you all real soon. Thanks for the love and support, and as always, this ain't nothing but a peanut. That sounds really reasonably good, but then 7 hours ago, the Coleman family made a post. We want to inform Ronnie's fans, supporters, and the bodybuilding community that Ronnie Coleman was admitted to the hospital on this past Sunday morning due to a serious medical condition. He is currently receiving expert medical care and continues to show incredible strength and resilience. At this time, we are not sharing additional details as the focus remains on Ronnie's recovery and well-being. We kindly ask for your understanding and support in keeping the environment respectful and free of speculation. Please rely only on official updates from Ronnie's family or authorized representatives. We are committed to keeping you informed as appropriate. Ronnie has always inspired the world with his toughness and heart, and we know he feels the love and energy being sent his way. With heartfelt regards, the Coleman family. So I just wanted to let people know that that's the case. You know, an icon, at least in the world of competitive bodybuilding, is in need of support. So send him your well wishes, your prayers if that's your thing, and yeah, just keeping people in the know, because I only just saw this right before we got on recording, and I do hope that he's okay. I had the pleasure and privilege of meeting him in 2023, and he was literally the first bodybuilding cover like icon for when I first got into fitness. He was the reigning Mr. Olympia at that time in 04, 05. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing better than prime Ronnie Coleman. There will always be arguments about what the prime was. I was always partial to, man, when he was in that like 98 to 2000 sweet spot. Oh my God, what a physique.
100%.
Unbelievable. But Ronnie's a legend, man. Like everyone who was lifting in that era, if you needed a little pump up before the gym, you watch a training video on YouTube of Ronnie Coleman. Back when YouTube was in its infancy, it felt like his training in the gym was incredible to watch. He seemed like, I mean, it was one of those, he has one of those personalities that by watching just little clips of, people filming him around the gym, you feel like he's your buddy. You feel like you know him. And I just remember at that time, when I was just getting into lifting, he was huge. And specifically, he was all over the BSN advertisements in the supplement store. And you would look, you'd look around at all the tubs of everything, and there'd be just like this giant poster of Ronnie Coleman with that bicep vein. And you'd be like, okay, Synthesix, fine. What was it? Cell Tech, of course. NO Explode, whatever this man is selling looking like that, when I'm like a 16-year-old kid, I'm in, So yeah, sending well wishes. Ronnie is an absolute legend, and hope he gets well soon.
And one anecdote, and we'll move along, because this embodies truly what makes iron culture. This man began competing in bodybuilding to get a free gym membership. It was not the other way around. And he continued to train, and even sometimes when he probably shouldn't have, related to being around surgeries and things like that, because he truly is a lover of the iron. He's a lifelong bodybuilder. Before he was a competitive bodybuilder, and one always came after the second. Even after winning 8 Mr. Olympias and being tantalized by the fame and everything else, at his core, at his heart, he is a man who is training. He is bodybuilding. He embodies it. So, yeah, couldn't be a better representative, in my opinion, because of that key element. So, I think that is the only somber announcement I have. Another cool announcement that people might be happy to hear about is, so I got some travel coming up, and we've been doing a lot of live episodes, and prior to that, we did a fair number of recorded episodes. So next week, folks, we won't be live, but we will have a really great recorded episode with Dr. Stian Larson. For those who are not like Trex and have been feverishly keeping their finger on the pulse of lengthened bias training, or lengthened partials, or comparing different types of exercises that train biarticular muscles in different ways. He's been doing a lot of really high-quality research in this area, and he's published a lot of very good work, and I have a great interview with him. I actually happened to be his one of his external supervisor on his master's. He did a lot of cool work also looking at the biomechanical modeling of low bar squats compared to high bar squats, some interesting applications to strength training and powerlifting. And he is now currently like the head of education at the Academy for Personal Training, which is a growing, excellent body that I've been involved with for going all the way back to 2015. I spoke at one of their conferences, but they started in Norway. They expanded into Sweden, and now they're expanding into the English market. But they do a fantastic job of providing high-quality personal trainer education. And just, it goes to show you, like, oh, who are we going to hire as our head of education? This recent biomechanics graduate who is still in the published research, still in the lab, still doing work as a researcher. So anyway, just wanted to give shout out to AFPT, and it's a really good interview for anyone who wants to stay up to date with that research. And of course, Trex was not present. He claimed he was busy, but we all know what happened. And if you did an interview with, say, a college football anything, I might also be busy at that time. So I'll just put that out there.
Yeah. So, yes, I believe that should be coming out this upcoming week. There is, Helms, I should mention, a small chance that that gets flipped around, but I will keep the cult completely up to date. That'll either be this upcoming Monday or the one after. One of those two. Cool. Okay? Because I have some travel as well. It's not just the world stops when you travel. I also have a life. I have responsibilities and a family. Okay?
Allegedly.
So we'll figure that stuff out, but definitely that recording is in the can. It is excellent. It's edited. It's ready to go. Okay? All right, Helms, we have some questions to get to. As you're looking through the chat, I've been perusing the chat. There's a few that came to the After Hours portal. Folks, if you want to submit a question and you're not listening live, you can go to massresearchreview.com/ironculture. Submit a question there anytime. We use them. We have the proof. Go back and listen to the episodes, folks. So Danny said, on a recent episode of the Smash Hit podcast, Front Page Fitness, that's the one I host with the Dr. Lauren Colenso-Semple, I mentioned that I eat a variety of fairly highly processed meat substitutes in order to get protein as a vegetarian. And so this person, their cardiologist, recommended a more plant-heavy diet, and they were asking what some of my favorites are. And Helms, I don't know if you partake in this particular pastime at all, but for me personally, at grocery stores in the States, a lot of them these days, if you go in the frozen food section, there will be a little, depending on where you are. You know, if you're in Portland, I think they have a bigger section. If you're in, rural North Carolina, it gets tight. You get like a shelf. But there's a section in the frozen foods aisle where they will have what used to be, Helms. I mean, you probably remember these days, I'm sure. Back in the day, they would have like some soy crumbles and like maybe a Beyond Burger or something like that. Nowadays, tremendous variety, honestly. Like, I'll be looking through, and there's brand names. Gardein is one that comes to mind. There's a bunch of different. Morningstar Farms is one that comes to mind. But I'll be looking through there, and they're like, yeah, we got teriyaki chicken, we got Korean barbecue chicken, we've got. So I mean, the chicken substitutes, for my money's worth, the beef has become, in many instances, fairly indistinguishable from actual beef. And the more you get away from beef, of course, then you can't tell anyway, right? But the beef has been good for a while, in my opinion. I've been amazed lately with the chicken products. The texture has gotten way better. The flavor was okay, but has really improved. So I like to just go into that aisle, and it's I just kind of see, okay, what's on sale, what looks interesting, what I have the taste for. You can find things like, maple flavored sausage patties for breakfast. Like there's actually like a tremendous variety now. So I think if your cardiologist puts you on a plant heavy diet and you're like, okay, but I'm not ready to like fundamentally change my eating pattern, which is a big distinction, then yeah, I would encourage you, check out that frozen aisle, see what they have on offer in your area, and you may be pleasantly surprised. But what I mean by changing your diet pattern is, like, a lot of people, it's like, well, normally for dinner I have a burger and a side. Well, I could just take out the red meat burger and put in a plant-based burger with, more fiber, less saturated fat, lower calories, and your cardiologist would probably say, great, looks good. Or you could say, I'm going to make a chickpea curry. It's like, so when you go on like especially switching to a vegan diet, you do find that in many cases, you're like, I eat fundamentally different cuisines now. I eat more Vietnamese cuisine, more Chinese cuisine, more Japanese cuisine, more Indian cuisine, right? But if you're just looking for a pretty simple change where you're doing more swaps and substitutions rather than a massive overhaul of the types of meals you consume, those products from me, Helms, are fantastic.
No, I totally agree. And yeah, the substitution options now are manifold and quite good.
Oh yeah.
And you just have to try a few. Like you won't necessarily, because there's so many options now, you can pick a bad one accidentally, but there are good ones. And this is two things that we've gotten pushback on either the podcast or the Instagram lately. I had a reel that we put on the Mass Research Review on ultra processed foods, and mostly very positive feedback because I tried to speak to some of the nuances of saying, hey, yeah, we see these correlations for ultra processed diets, but not in every case is an ultra processed thing just a bad food.
Yeah.
And this is a great instance where being ultra processed, which applies almost to all of these, or at least heavily processed, would apply because they're engineered food products. But these are instances where it could be directly heart healthy, and we have strong data to suggest that. Calling back to our last episode where we talked about the potential harms of high protein diets, which are largely overblown, even in the observational data, a consistent thing you'll see for all-cause mortality, heart, metabolic health, when you look at protein, the relationship shift around, but almost universally, you see plant protein either positively associated with health and all-cause mortality being lower, or neutral at worst. So even if you were to maintain a diet that is probably a little too high in calories, probably a little too high in fat, like food is perfect, and you're eating foods that are fried and ultra processed, just switching them out to being plant-based proteins probably would result in some meaningful reductions in things like LDL, total cholesterol, and blood pressure, even if it didn't make a substantial difference as far as like your body composition immediately, or some other things. It would probably be a step in the right direction towards health, or at least removing a negative. Yeah. So I fully endorse that.
All right, Helms, got one for you here. I'm not even going to chime in, okay? I want to make sure we get plenty in here tonight. So we had a question here about agonist-antagonist supersets, and we can extrapolate it also to supersets with muscle groups that are just fundamentally not related to one another, right? Supersetting tricep extensions with calf raises, for example. So this individual mentioned that when you do supersets, apparently they were consuming some content you had written or created about this, and you were doing the antagonist supersets back to back. So you finish one, you go straight into the other set, and then taking 2 to 3 minutes between supersets. They prefer, they mentioned that sometimes they were getting a little fatigued just from like a general cardiovascular perspective. So they would do set A, take a minute, do set B, and then take, maybe another minute and back to set A. So they were wondering, do you find a meaningful distinction, and do you think one would be fundamentally better than the other, or are those both totally viable approaches?
Totally viable, and probably better if you are supersetting cardiovascularly demanding exercises. And while the stock standard, here's what we do in research and how we write it out in a Mass Research Review article, is to do it that way, 2-minute rest, and that will directly extrapolate to the amount of time saving that's been shown in the studies. That's actually not what I do in my own personal training. I haven't timed a rest period in a decade or longer, to be 100% honest. I go when I'm ready. And I know that by using an antagonist or peripheral agonist setup, the two types of supersets you stipulated, the main thing I have to do is just make sure I'm not going too quickly. And if you're not in great cardiovascular shape, that will easily accomplish itself by just auto-regulating it. So that's a totally viable way to do it, and it actually is how I do it in practice.
I appreciate you leaning into the old man character. No one will tell me what to do, nor will they tell me when to do it. And at your age, I think you've earned that, Helms.
Yep.
Another question that I think is right up your alley. So this question is about scaling nutritional variables. So the question is how to scale protein and calories down for very small people. So this person has what they describe as a tiny client So they described like a short woman who weighs about 45 kilograms. And they're wondering, I would imagine, this is something a lot of people report when they first start working with clients. Maybe they're used to being a 180-pound man, so they have a calorie number that for them has always felt very low, and a calorie number that feels very high. They kind of have their working range, and then they're working with someone who weighs 80 pounds less than them, and they're like, I've never really seen numbers this low. Should I be worried? Should I be uncomfortable? Do you make any kind of special accommodations for people with very low body weights in that regard?
I think a lot of it is just reframing your own perspective and thinking in relative terms. Like one of the most common things you'll see on the internet is generally you shouldn't be under 1,800 calories as a male or 1,200 calories as a woman, because that's just no-go land.
Right.
But let's be honest here. So a 45 kilogram person for the Americans is 100 pounds.
Yeah.
So sometimes those who have been on the internet a while, they will sometimes see body weight kcal multipliers, and you'll see like cutting recommendations to be from like 10 to 12 kcals per pound, maintenance around 13 to 14, and then bulking at like 15 or higher. 1,200 is on the higher end of the dieting range for this person. And we talked about in the episode where you recapped your really awesome article on the limits of metabolic adaptation, that everyone in all cases should be in a deficit. We'll say almost all cases, just because we're gonna be our smart science communicator selves.
Right.
If they were to multiply their body weight in pounds times 10.
Yeah.
And for someone who's 100 pounds, that's 1,000 calories. So the first thing is you do just need to be aware that those body weight multipliers are generally better than any kind of absolute values that you have, even though we've been conditioned with the 2,000 and the 2,500 calorie like standard person, female and male, that we have been see on food labels and things like that, or the kind of the fitness tropes like the 1,800 and the 1,200. But yeah, in practice, I often operate like something like I'm going to be uncomfortable to go below 10 kcals per pound, and I'll operate from there up to 15, 16, depending upon kind of where if I want to use that approach. So that is the big one. Protein, I would say all of the variables we use apply quite well, and it's more about the leanness of the person. If they're really, really lean, or if they are very, very high in body fat, it's probably better to use our mutual publication that we did, led by Dr. Refalo's guidance on grams per kilogram fat-free mass, and have an estimation of body fat, than it is to just go off raw body weight, or you can get a really inflated protein intake for someone high in body fat, or potentially too low, potentially, for someone low in body fat. But I think the first step, again, is think of calories in relative terms. Think of kind of your really low end is 10, and then your probable upper end around 15, 16 for most people, although you do see some pretty large outliers in energy expenditure. And then from there, do be aware of the differences in terms of experiences of practical meals and also the nutrient density. So there are a few things I do get concerned with when you have very small people on low-calorie diets, is that it is very difficult to build them plates and just practical meal plans. If you have someone on, let's say this person is relatively sedentary and they're dieting and you need to put them on 1,100 to 1,200 calories, that would not be unreasonable at all. But you might be going, all right, cool, I want you to have 1 to 2 servings of fruit and vegetables per day. You know what? You have to actually think about what fruits you're having them eat, because an apple might be 10% of their calories, right? So like if it's a large one, so it's a lot. So you do have to be a little more concerned about the pragmatic aspect of ensuring micronutrient density and an appropriate fiber intake, while not really crowding out the rest of their diet.
Yeah, I think a lot of us have been there in prep. Like, my calories tend to get really low, but I'll even start looking at vegetables with a very careful eye and being like, you're a vegetable, but you're no broccoli, you're no cauliflower. So you start looking at that ratio of total carbohydrate to fiber and trying to make sure that you're kind of keeping that within the range, because you need to be using that to get your fiber target for the day, right? So yeah, you start doing a lot more arithmetic and geometry as you're trying to piece together that diet, and it gets even more dicey for lower body weights.
I'm glad you said geometry, because I do think something that's very important when you're dealing with these low calorie counts is to look at energy density. And this is very simply taking the gram of the food and dividing it by the kcals. And you want to be leveraging a lot of, especially if they're dieting, and especially if they're reporting hunger and they're struggling with adherence. You get a lot of bang for your buck when you look at the relationship between adherence and successful weight loss, especially in ad libitum trials, when you leverage low energy density foods. So, of course, these are invariably, almost exclusively, fruits and vegetables that we talked about. But even in terms of what proteins you're going to use, you want to look at low calorie, low fat, low carbohydrate protein options, and things that are, essentially from the moderate and lower for the most part when someone is dieting on these low of calories, because they are also low in body weight. And it's an unfortunate thing as well. If you try to mess with the energy outside of the equation, they don't burn very many calories. They don't need to burn as many calories, but you also don't want to over leverage that. So it, I think, needs to be a part of the equation, having a fair amount of activity, but you can't go crazy with it, because it just will be so much time and effort to get a relatively low absolute value of energy expenditure out. And the final thing I'll say is, if you're going off of, just like someone shouldn't be doing like the 1200, 1800 mindset with non-average weight people, pound to half a pound of, like a pound of weight loss per week being a good rule of thumb, a 500 calorie deficit is inappropriate for someone who weighs 100 pounds. Straight up. Okay? Yeah. That might be half of the calories you'd be assigning them during like 1100, 1200. Like, that's tremendously too large. They will see more visual changes from a half a pound than someone else will, because they don't weigh very much. So you probably want to be looking at a 100 to 300 calorie deficit at most for someone this size. So that is something that you need to be thinking about differently as well. If you generally think, oh yeah, pound a week, 500 calorie deficit, stock standard diet, that's great for everybody at all times. No, that's probably far too quick.
And like you're saying, you think about losing a half pound off of a frame of a 4'11" person versus a person that's 5'10", right? Very, very different visual kind of response to that. Speaking of which, we had a question about BMI and height. So they said, please discuss the individual bias we see with BMI for short people versus tall people, i.e. short people are more likely to be low BMI, tall people more likely to be high BMI due to the nature of the equation. This is something that doesn't get discussed very much in the world of BMI, but gets discussed all the time in the world of fat-free mass index. And of course, it applies to both. So fat-free mass index, we talk about how much fat-free mass you have per unit height squared. We divide by meters squared. And all of us who obsess about the littlest differences in muscularity, we talked for ages about how we need to account for this height bias, which tends to inflate values in taller people and depress values in shorter people. And there's still a tremendous amount of debate. I don't think it's resolved at all in terms of what that correction formula should actually look like. I don't think we actually have a really good estimate of that slope. I think it's a question that can definitely be answered in a very robust way. I just don't think it's been done yet. But all I really have to say about this individual bias is it exists, but BMI still tends to do pretty good. We know that BMI is a flawed metric in the technical sense. It is not a perfect indicator of one's risk for really anything at all. Obviously, if we have access to high quality body fat percentage data, we'd love that. And frankly, we can do better than that. We'd love to know specifically where are you storing body fat, because if you are 25% body fat with very low visceral fat, that tells us a very different metabolic story than someone who's the same body fat level with a tremendous amount of visceral fat, abdominal obesity, things of that nature. So all that is to say, anytime we're using one of these simple metrics to kind of take a 30,000 foot view of somebody's cardiometabolic risk or cardiometabolic function, we know that we're leaving granular detail on the table. Okay, so BMI is obviously a very blunt tool. It is true that there is some built-in height bias. It's also true, Helms, that BMI cutoffs are also a little bit biased by ethnic background and race. Not when we say bias, that makes it sound like there's some sort of intentionality. What I really mean by that is, there are some populations where you'd say, normally the overweight cutoff begins at 25, but based on health data for these individuals, maybe it should probably actually start at 26. Maybe for these individuals, it should probably actually start around 24. And you will actually find some countries in the world where they, when their government is putting out health information, they're saying, no, for our population, based on the predominant race and ethnicity makeup of our population, overweight starts at 24. There are countries that do that. So there are these biases built in, not due to malicious nature, but just because of the way it turns out that a simple ratio with one of the terms squared isn't a perfect encapsulation of cardiometabolic risk. So yeah, it is good to know. But at the same time, I think when you look at the broader literature on how BMI seems to do at the population level, estimating cardiometabolic risk, I would not, for example, say, well, my BMI is 33, but I'm 6'2". I'm sure it's fine. You want to dig deeper and contextualize. And the BMI, to be very clear, when I say don't assume it's fine, quote unquote, that's such a oversimplification. A BMI is only enough to raise the little red flag, the very tiny one that says maybe you should consult with a physician. If you haven't done blood work in a while, do it. And maybe you do the blood work and they say, you know what? Your BMI is 27.5, but you seem to be a muscular fella and your glycemic control looks great. Your blood lipids look great. Your blood pressure is great. I'm not worried about it. This BMI works on you. That is completely a realistic thing that, frankly, a huge amount, a large proportion of our audience that probably applies to, right? Is that their BMI is slightly in the overweight range. If they were to go to a doctor and say, I want to lose weight to save my life, their doctor would look at them like an idiot. They'd say, we just did your blood work. Everything looks great. Your blood pressure's great. If you want to lose weight because you feel like it, by all means, I'm not going to stop you. But yeah, BMI always needs to be contextualized with those kinds of caveats in mind.
Yeah, and there's actually a comment that popped in by a Blug. I don't know if it's fair to say BMI is flawed. How? Never supposed to be designed to assess body fat. Either way, high BMI is predictive of many negative things, irrespective of weight distribution. It was never supposed to be a measure about metabolic health. I think we're in complete agreement with that.
Yeah. We're in semantic disagreement, but conceptual agreement. Flawed in the way that many people interpret it, which is you are a completely healthy human being until you reach 25.1, and then you're in a little orange threat zone, and then once you go to 30.1, now you're in the deep end. You now have obesity, and that is what describes your metabolic risk. Obviously, BMI is, if you want to take it literally, it cannot be flawed because it is a calculation. And as long as you calculate it right, it is what it is. But I think it is an imperfect indicator of one's cardiometabolic health, but also not a useless indicator by any means. It does a very nice job at the population level. And yeah, I think we've hammered that to death many times and written mass content about it as well. Helms, before we answer just a couple more and get out of here, I do want to give some shout outs. People in the chat, which by the way, we didn't even really tell anyone we were going live tonight. So props to everyone who made it into the live chat. I didn't even set up the stream until like 5 minutes beforehand, so you couldn't even really hop in the waiting room. So really appreciate people who made it out. People congratulating us on 100 issues of Mass. Really appreciate that. Absolutely, just a lovely review by Philip in the chat talking about the Mass Research Review, saying it's honestly the best overall health resource you can subscribe to. The subscription is paid for itself in terms of time saved, not having to search for reliable health info. And yeah, when we write Mass, we really put a lot of time and detail and attention into covering those topics so we don't have to make fools of ourselves and come out and do our microplastic 10 ways we were wrong kind of roundup. But Helms, when we need to do it, we do it, and we're not worried about it. But yeah, really appreciate everyone making it in there. People wishing Ronnie Coleman well. That's a beautiful thing. We love that in our community, of course. Cole Runnings mentioned that they're a longtime listener, first time attending live. So major props to them for attending it on a day where structurally everything was stacked against you. We made it as hard as possible to attend live today, so major props on that.
Also, amazing movie that you have taken your handle to name after.
Absolutely, Cool Runnings for sure. Let's see, Helms, are there any ones that you really want to address before we head out, or should I grab a couple more?
There's one in the Iron Culture chat that I think is Killer K, frequent question asker, and he's got kind of a clustering of questions that are related to response variation. And since Dr. Mike Zordos is not here to slap our wrists, if we
We're
say
allowed to
this
say
wrong,
whatever we want. Yeah,
we can
good.
say whatever we want. That's right. So I'll read two of these questions out. How large is variance for growth responses? If lifestyle is dialed in, do people exist who get their best growth outside of typical recommendations? Meaning they get better results with 4 to 6 RIR or less than 8 fractional sets, a shortened bias, and do training non-responders or very low responders exist, or even optimizing all the variables they will see very little results? And what is the cause? Is it myostatin, low T, etc.? So there's going to be stuff coming out on this. In fact, sitting in both Dr. Trexler and my inbox right now is Dr. Zach Robinson's dissertation work that we're looking to publish. And it specifically addressed one aspect of response variation. But before we even address that, I think it's really important to note that you can find papers in the research that claim to identify high and low responders. And in most cases, what they are actually characterizing is they are simply using a median split, quintiles, quartiles, or some type of threshold cutoff of the minimum worthwhile change or the minimum detectable change of the measurement for either strength or hypertrophy, and saying these people were low responders, these people were normal responders, these people were high responders. The reality is, though, is what they're telling you is that in this study, those people responded high, medium, or low relative to that group of people. And I think we can all, those of us with a few years of training experience under our belt who've hit a plateau and either overcome it or not, think of times where, for whatever reason, we did not get a good response or we got a great response. And then if you've been in the game as long as myself or Trexler, you might have tried to repeat that because you wanted to rekindle that magic, and it just didn't happen. And this is outside of just simply the reality that you're going to have diminished returns as you train longer and longer and longer, and that your best case scenario 10 years in is actually going to be far worse than your worst case scenario when you were 10 weeks in. When you could have looked at a muscle magazine and made better gains than doing everything right at this point. So there are two things that we're limited by in the research. The one I just addressed, we don't know if that's actually a characteristic trait of the person, which implies that is something inherent to them, that they don't respond well across the board, or if they just didn't respond well in that study. So that's really important. The second thing is that it's actually incredibly challenging because of that phenomenon we've experienced, where we do a similar protocol within a couple of years when we haven't really drastically changed things, and for some reason we did well one time and the other time we did not, anecdotally. That's actually something you have to tease out in a study design. So we think we address it when we do something like a within participant design. Okay, left limb, right limb, they are doing two different protocols. You respond better on one side. It's the same environment. We can't really know until we repeat that protocol and then swap limbs and then even do it again. That is actually what's required to tease out statistically the random, well, that's not random, the variability that is anything unrelated to the training itself in terms of your response to what your normal response is, quote unquote normal response. So there are multiple things at play. There is what is your typical variation in the way you respond to a given protocol regardless. And there is also, do you respond differently to different things? And at this stage, I am reasonably confident in saying that variables which describe the dose of training probably don't vary between individuals. However, we don't have data to support the idea that any and all individual variation does not exist. So what Dr. Robinson's work specifically did was it looked at different levels of volume. And I think in a lab setting, when you manipulate volume and you hold everything else constant and you control for one of the biggest things that I think happens in the real world is that when you try to do more volume, you end up pacing. You don't train as close to failure. You take longer rest periods. You're more likely to swap out RDLs to a back extension because it's just hard to do that much work. That doesn't happen in an 8 to 12 week study because you've got 4 research assistants yelling at you and making sure, sometimes even with a Tendo unit or a GymAware, that your velocity is appropriately slow so that you're maintaining the intensity. You can't pace yourself while you're doing more sets. In those confined conditions, we have pretty well established that you will respond better to higher volume. But that's just not what happens in the real world. Many people will have the relationship where more volume produces more gains than less volume, but they are capped at how much volume they can do well with. So what you will not see, even among the low volume responders crowd, is that they have a fundamentally different relationship. It's just that the ceiling is lower. So you run into a bunch of people who do 8 sets or less. A lot of them are going to get better response from doing 6 to 8 sets than they will 2 to 4. And many of them will have quote unquote graduated from doing 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 sets, but there is some cap where if they go above it, it seems to be an issue. So to answer your question, Killer K, in terms of volume, this is a very specific thing. No, there's only practical limits. So there's not going to be someone, I think, who has an inverse relationship where, oh, actually, the less volume I do, the more I grow. They're just going to find that they can't do and don't need to do as much volume as someone else and get a robust response. And that also goes hand in hand with the fact that the initial sets you do produce more on a set-by-set basis in terms of hypertrophy, so that you're getting minimal gains anyway if you're going to go from 15 to 25 compared to going from 5 to 10, even though both are 10-set increases. I would also put forth that people are not going to get better results training further from failure than closer to failure. You're not going to see an inversion of this. Or not lifting weights would make you grow better than lifting weights, right? So, like if you can kind of take this to absurd level, but really it just comes down to fatigue management. And if high volumes and training close to failure puts you in the hole, it means you need to manage an appropriate amount of training to failure and doing higher volumes to get the most you can effectively recover from. That doesn't mean that you are someone who uniquely responds to shortened bias training, higher RIR, and lower volumes. It just means that when you train at longer muscle length, closer to failure, with more volume, it's easier for you than someone else to overshoot what you can recover from. So you need to just think about the recovery demands, not that you are a fundamentally unique snowflake. No offense. We're all very important, but we're also all humans with a biology. So hopefully that answers your question and qualifies some of that. The one thing I will say is low responders and high responders absolutely do exist. I don't really care what the research says. We see professional athletes. We see some people who start training, or even before they start training, have a much higher baseline. Whether it's just a higher baseline or a faster or better or more extended response, there's debate around that. But think about the dude you saw if you played high school sports who looked like a bodybuilder when he was 16. He, as soon as he got facial hair, he could buy beer at 17 and no one would even ask for an ID. Never touched a weight in his life. Or the cyclists who randomly look like bodybuilders even though they're trying to lose muscle mass compared to the guy who's busting his ass and doesn't look half as good as them. That's a real thing. We see it all the time. So that is just reality. Now, why? That is an open question. And sometimes we see associations in the literature which definitely should be explored further. And certainly things that if we manipulate do cause more growth. If you're given a effective myostatin inhibitor, there's some novel drugs that are being tested right now. It does seem, at least in rodents and monkeys, that will make you grow more. If we give you an exogenous level of testosterone, that seems to make you grow more. Indeed, the absolute level of muscle mass that biological males have after puberty and women differs. And indeed, if you take a look at the quartiles or quintiles or tertiles of men in the normal range of physiological levels of testosterone, you will see a few pound difference between the top and the low. However, if you then go, okay, well, because you have high end levels of testosterone, you'll respond better to training. We actually don't see that. So your baseline levels of testosterone do not predict your response to training. And that's probably why men and women also have similar responses to training in terms of their relative increases in strength and their relative percentage increase in muscle mass, because they have a fraction of the testosterone that men do. So a lot of the stuff affects baseline but doesn't predict response, and we're still teasing it out. So we don't know why someone would or would not respond well to training, at least not reliably. We can't predict training responses, even though many have tried. High and low responders do exist, but teasing it out in the research is very challenging. And even if you are someone who is either A, a low responder, or B, someone who seems to fatigue at an earlier point relative to the dose of training that someone who fatigues at a higher point, you're not responding differently. You just need to consider that and titrate the amount of work you're doing, build it up slowly, and think about fatigue management more than someone who seems to be recovering quickly and can handle higher total works.
Good stuff. Yeah, I'm not even going to touch that. I'm sure we're going to have a lot to say about that in the future once that paper is out. I think we're probably going to preprint it before we publish it, so that'll be in the near future, and we can save those battles for then, because there's going to be a lot of misinterpretation where if you know, like you said, I mean, that it was a long explanation where if you're going to talk about someone being a better responder or worse responder, that's actually a question where you have to say, well, hold on a second. Let's drill down exactly what that means. And that requires like 6 more sentences after that, right? So we will certainly get into more detail about that later. I wanted to answer one last question from the live chat. We had a good one here about caffeine. Cole Runnings. I want to make sure we address their question since they made it out for the first time here. They said they're seeing more pre-workout supplements with delayed release caffeine formulas, in quotes. Is there any actual science behind that? So I've been out of the pre-workout game for a while, so I don't know exactly what these labels would be including in a delayed release caffeine formula. I wouldn't be shocked, Helms, and this is me just kind of speculating, if maybe some of them are having, you know, the little like proprietary like 2 or 3 ingredient blend where maybe they're including something like caffeine with something like theacrine, often under the brand name teacrine.
Yep.
And so theacrine, not to be confused with theanine, which is also often kind of lumped or kind of paired with caffeine. Theacrine, there was a handful of studies a handful of years ago where they were looking at it because the idea was that it was, very similar to caffeine structurally in terms of its mechanism, in terms of its physiological effects on the body, but it is something that has a different time course in terms of its rate of appearance and its rate of disappearance from your body. So kind of like a smoother, lower kind of curve in terms of its pharmacokinetics. So people were like, oh, maybe this will be the type of thing where it gives you like more sustained energy during that kind of peak period there. I know some of the people that did some of those studies, great people, great researchers. So I'm not, taking a swing at the research itself. But to me personally, this has always seemed like an answer without a problem at best. Or at worst, maybe a compounding of an existing problem. Where if it was, what I'm getting at there is if you were to tell me, hey, we got a new version of caffeine, but instead of you taking it like 45 to 60 minutes before working out, and then you having like a 5 to 6, sometimes 80, sometimes there's been measured instances where the half-life of caffeine is up to 12 hours. Instead of doing that, if someone was like, hey, here's a new kind of caffeine, you take it, it reaches peak levels in 5 or 10 minutes, and the half-life is 45 minutes. This stuff is out of your system. You know, I don't want to, now I'm doing half-life math on the fly. Theoretically, forget I said the 45 minutes, but you're going to take this, it's going to peak in 5 or 10 minutes. It's going to be completely out of your system in 3 or 4 hours or 2 hours. I would sign up for that in a heartbeat. That is a better version of caffeine in most cases, because one of the things we hate about caffeine, we can live with the 1 hour, it's not that hard to plan ahead, take it at 45, 60 minutes beforehand. What we hate about caffeine is the fact that you take a huge dose to get an ergogenic effect. Its half-life is 5 or 6 hours. You still have a bunch of caffeine in your system when you're trying to lay down and go to sleep if you're taking this basically any time other than first thing in the morning or within those first few hours in the morning. So for me, the whole idea of a delayed release caffeine to me has just been really difficult to wrap my head around conceptually, because I want the opposite. I want a version of caffeine that, in terms of pharmacokinetics, is more like nicotine. I want it to appear now, and I want it to go away. So yeah, I'm really not on board with it. Realistically, is it going to matter if they throw a little teacrine or theacrine in there? No. I haven't actually seen any empirical research to confirm that there's any downside of teacrine or theacrine. Like, it's not like in the studies on it that they say, by the way, 40% of our subjects dropped out of the study because they had intractable insomnia. We don't really see any of those like really material effects, but I personally would like to see a head-to-head comparison in terms of some, placebo, caffeine, theacrine. I'd love to see if you take that, late morning, early afternoon, is there an impact on sleep quality? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. But either way, I'm not going out of my way looking for a delayed release caffeine, because if anything, I want the opposite.
Yeah. Can I add a little bit of color to that? Because I was looking up some of this while you were
Yeah,
talking.
yeah. What do you got?
Yeah, so there's a couple of there is theacrine, which
Yeah.
we've talked about, and there's also a few others. So there's a patented version of encapsulated creatine, so that it comes out slower, and it takes like 6 hours to even get it fully through your system to take it to the 80% mark.
Right.
And it's under Zoom XR. It's a registered trademark. And there's also a novel form of caffeine that is out, dicaffeine malate, which is a combination of caffeine and malic acid, and it provides a more sustained release. Now, the way they're being promoted and used is for people who don't want a crash or a spike. So the idea is you get less jitters, and the idea is that you're not experiencing kind of those more acute withdrawal feelings of, oh, my energy's gone.
So this is not like, hey, I'm working out in 30 minutes and I want to be, absolutely amped up. This is more like I got a 6-hour, 8-hour car ride and I want to stay awake at the wheel.
Right, or I'm a first responder going on shift.
Yeah,
and I need
time.
I just need to kind of maintain a certain level of alertness.
Yeah,
or maybe I'm in a tactical kind of situation.
I'm flying a plane for 31 hours straight.
Exactly. And I don't want to be jittery. I don't want to have a spike. I want to have a sustained awakeness.
Yeah.
Now, the question is then should they be used in pre-workouts?
Yeah.
And I would say it's a bad fit. Like I'm looking at this one formulation. I'm not going to name any names or brands, but they're saying, hey, it gives you a boost for your workout and a sustained energy and no crash. And the way they've done this is that they have just straight up caffeine anhydrous, 235 milligrams. And then they also have dicaffeine malate at 100 milligrams. And then they also have Zum XR, the delayed release caffeine, at 30 milligrams. So that they basically have an escalating dose based upon the time that it is released into your system.
Yeah.
So they have the smallest dose of the one that's going to be there. I mean, if it takes 6 hours just to get fully 80% of your system, then you have the half-life stacked on top of that. You're going to have caffeine in your system that 30 milligrams for a day, straight up. And then they go from 30 milligrams to 100 of the dicaffeine malate, which has a longer, release profile than your typical caffeine. Then they have the normal caffeine, which I would argue, like you said, Trex, is a relatively slow release profile inherently, given that if you take 235 milligrams of caffeine, which is almost that same meta-regression dose that you needed to take before 10 a.m. to not negatively affect your sleep at 10 p.m., 13 hours later, was when they reliably said, okay, this is a non-issue. I don't think that's a good idea. I don't think it has a place in pre-workouts. Maybe if you are quite literally in a situation where, okay, I'm a first responder, I'm an emergency personnel, I'm a cop, I'm a tactical thing, I'm a professional military personnel who is going to have a training exercise where it's starting with a bang. We're doing something explosive in the first hour. We're going to get a mock ambush, mock battle. But then I'm basically, quote unquote, on call for the next 2 days, doing ranger training, rucking, hiking, and I'm not going to have the opportunity to know exactly what's going on, but that's a very niche application. The
Yeah.
typical person who buys a pre-workout does not want this.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's what kind of threw me. I was thinking like, well, if you were going to put something that wasn't totally nonsensical in a pre-workout, what would you do? And I think that, to be clear, I'm not. This is a great question from the from our dear listener Cole Runnings with a great name. Yeah, it's very good reason to like say, hey, why are people doing this? What is this trend?
Yeah.
And here's what I can tell you, having someone who's been interested in observing the supplement space for far longer. I got weirdly into supplements when I was like 14, when that was not a thing back then. You know, nowadays fitness has like gotten younger, where like now kids are into fitness. That I was like a weirdo in my high school of like, why is this 14-year-old lifting all day? But I got really into supplements, and so I've seen these trends over the years. And if you want to save yourself a little bit of sanity when it comes to trends in the supplement world, some of them are simply going to be nonsense. They may be profitable, they may not. They may have some kind of gimmick that's easy to market, they may not. But you are going to see things come and go that you look back and you're like, why in the world did we ever turn over that rock or decide to write that marketing copy? So this is one that, like you said, Helms, I think maybe for, to borrow a pharmaceutical term, for like off-label use, it's like, I take this pre-workout because I'm a nurse and I work some day shifts and some night shifts. And sometimes, Helms, if I were made governor, president, whatever, I would make it completely illegal to do that to a human being. But they literally have nurses that will, in the same week, work some day shifts and some night shifts. I find that to be unconscionable and biologically absurd. Like, I can't fathom how that exists in a world where we know about circadian rhythms and health. But anyway, if you're in that kind of situation, you're like, yeah, give me, pump up 4,000 with this, triple caffeine blend. Because, yeah, it makes sense. You're going to be like, listen, I'm going to be dragging for 8 hours, and I can't be dragging for 8 hours, right? So, yeah, if you like to do that more than just refilling the old coffee cup a few times, more power to you. But if I were looking at a pre-workout and they're like, hey, if this was just caffeine, you need to take it 13 hours before bed to not mess up your sleep. But guess what? We threw in the extended release version. I'd be like, well, great. Then I'm just screwed. So, yeah, you probably want to stay away from that, in my opinion. All right, Helms.
I agree.
Anything you want to say to the good people before we head out here? You're going to be going on your little sabbatical here, so you better get it all in.
Hey, now I am incredibly grateful that I get the opportunity to travel to awesome places, literally because I started lifting weights back in 2004. To think now that I'm getting invited to speak to people with live translators in Italian and Spanish, and go to shows and judge and meet people who fell in love with the same nonsense that I did, and the silliness of flexing on stage in a Speedo or even just lifting weights. It's a privilege and an honor, and people like you have made it possible for me to lean into this strange thing I love because of your love for it. And you've been with us for 100 issues of Mass, 300 and what is this, 34 episodes of Iron Culture?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, and like you said, we were joking facetiously about me being a immortal vampire in terms of my fitness years, but the thing that I know Zerdos won't like, and you probably are at least disappointed in, is that when you guys bring that up, it actually just makes me very grateful to think of how long I've been able to do something I love and how many awesome people I've connected with. So I just got a lot of gratitude and appreciation for everyone in the live chat, everyone that's going to listen to this after the fact, and everyone that's been supporting, me, whether they realize it or not, since the start, and hopefully contributing to make this sometimes crazy fitness space, like you said, it's getting younger and younger, for better or for worse, hopefully just a little bit better.
Well, Helms, I love it. I will acknowledge you are going. I mean, there's a lot going on right now. You're taking a week off. We did 100 issues of Mass. It kind of gives the vibes of like a lifetime award acceptance speech here. So I don't want to mess it up. That was a beautiful thing. Leaving on good vibes. Enjoy your trip. Enjoy judging other people. And speaking about
I always do.
Yeah,
I always do, Trex.
it's your favorite thing, judging these shows. You just like to tell people what their flaws are, and I see that every month working with you on Mass. But yeah, folks, we will be back next week. Most likely, it's going to be that pre-recorded interview with Stian Larson. If not, then something else will be here. But we will have an episode that you can count on. So we will see you back here in exactly 7 days. Take care, everybody.